What if you lived at a time in early Appalachian history where death was so normal that people built their own coffins at home to ease the burden on their loved ones? So, this article from a September 1911 newspaper called the Virginia Pilot. It had a very short article about a man who already built his own coffin and he was building another one for his wife. There was another article, this one shared that same year. It talks about a man in Kentucky with tuberculosis. He was building his own coffin in his own shop. The article notes that he did it happily and sometimes he sang while he worked. These articles are documenting a part of the culture that readers in the early 1900s already understood. In the 1800s and early 1900s, death was just a normal part of life. In remote Appalachia, there may not have been hospitals or medical practitioners at all. People died at home. People were sick at home and they took care of one another. When people passed away at home, it was handled by the family and by neighbors and community members. Usually, women were in charge of washing and preparing the person for burial. Coffins were built by loved ones, carpenters, or they had community builds where men worked together to make them. Funerals were handled by neighbors or small local undertakers. The modern funeral industry that exists today didn't exist yet. Back then, it didn't dominate the process like it does today. Today, funerals are very expensive, and typically the funeral homes take care of the entire process. As death has been taken out of our hands by the culture, by the capitalism of the funeral industry. So death is in the hands of strangers that we pay to handle this process. It's professionalized. When people passed away in the early 1900s, the body remained at home. They would have a wake where loved ones and neighbors, they would sit up with the dead. People would often just stay with the deceased to make sure that they were never alone in those early days of grieving. Neighbors, they would bring food and they would visit and they would make sure that the family had what they needed and they would stay with them and keep them company, sometimes for days, so that people within the community could come visit and people had time to dig a grave and build coffins. So it was a more lengthy process that took place in the home. People would talk and tell stories and they would help the family through that first stretch of grief. These newspaper articles talking about building your own coffin, it wasn't necessarily morbid like we would see today. These men proudly discussed what they were doing, and they thought of it as a way to reduce the burden on their loved ones once they passed away.